So to do this, we're going to have a transaction list component. So let's go to our components and make a new component, and we'll call it transactions. Let's make it plural, transactions list.js, and we'll do RFC, React Functional Component. And for this transactions list, we're going to receive the transactions from Redux so we can display them one by one. So let's go to main.js. We need to display this transactions list. So we'll do it before that transactions form. So transactions list, transaction, so we can automatically import it. If it doesn't, it will import it by itself. And okay, so we want to pass in the transactions just like we did with the balance. But for the balance, we checked the amount and got the sum of the amounts, all of them, and displayed it. But this time we're just going to be displaying the transactions. So we'll just pass in the transactions that we're receiving from the state, from Redux state. And now in transactions list.js, we would receive this like with object destructuring and transactions. So now we're receiving the transactions. Let's actually display this. So we're going to have a h3 first, which is just going to say transactions. And what we're going to have is a unordered list. So this is HTML element, and we're just going to give it a class name. And that class name is list. This is just a class from our app.css. So now inside this unordered list, for each transaction we want to display it inside this list. So it's going to be a list of our transactions. So let's open up these and do transactions.map, and then we're going to receive a transaction and arrow function, and we want to return the transaction. So we need the transaction component now. So let's just use the transaction for now over here, and we need to make a transaction component in our components. So this is basically undefined right now. So let's make this. So transaction.js, transaction, not transactions, sorry, and RFC, React Functional Component. And for now, I'm just going to say, actually, no, leave it empty for now. So add transactions list, and we'll pass in a key. Otherwise, you get error. We need a key, which is going to be the transaction.id. Though the error wouldn't be like, it would be a warning, I think. So it's not really important, but if you want to remove that warning, just pass in the key. And then, so each transaction is going to have its own key, a unique key. And then we want to pass in the transaction itself, so we can display it. So transaction, and then we'll receive the transaction inside transaction.js. So let's do that. So transaction, not capital T, and then let's just display this transaction. We'll display the transaction.text for now, because remember we have text for this transaction, or we have ID, or we have amount. So okay, so now let's actually see this. So if I save this, transaction is not, I need to import transaction inside our transactions list, because we are using the component here but it's not imported. So import from /transaction. So now if I save this, as you can see, we have our transactions being displayed over here. So we just want to make this a bit nicer and display the amount as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and style this component. So let's remove this div, and we're going to have it as a list item, because remember in the transactions list we have an unordered list, and inside the unordered list we have many list items. So let's have a list item tag. And this list item is the class is going to be, so the styling of it is either going to be red or green. So we're going to change it red or green based on the transaction amount, if it's minus or plus. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll do transaction.amount. So checking the amount. If it's more than 0, then so we'll do the question mark, and then if it is more than 0, then we would show the plus class, which is inside app.css, is just some styling. And otherwise, we'll be displaying the minus class, which is also some styling. So if the transaction amount is bigger than 0, which means it is positive, then we'll do plus, otherwise we'll do minus, which means it's negative, or 0. So, okay. So actually we want to check if it's bigger than or equal to 0, then we'll do plus, because 0 is not really minus, but also 0 is not positive, but I'd just rather do it as plus. So, okay. So let's go ahead and now display the transaction text. So let's do that. So transaction.text. And then after that, we want to display the transaction amount. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll have a span. and then we'll display. So we want to display a plus or minus a minus based on the transaction amount. So let's go ahead and do that. So we just have a variable over here. We'll call it sign, and this variable would be equal to either plus or minus a string, which is either plus or minus based on the amount, just like we did over here. But instead of giving it a class, we'll either do plus or minus. So we'll do transaction.amount, and then we'll check if transaction.amount is bigger than 0, sorry. And if it is bigger than 0, that means it's positive, so we'll do plus. Bigger than or equal to 0, let's just do. And otherwise, we'll do a minus. So now let's go ahead and display the sign before the transaction amount. And then we'll also display the transaction amount now. So before we display the transaction amount, we want to have a dollar sign because it's going to be in dollars, and then we'll display the transaction amount. So we'll do math.abs, so absolute, which doesn't run. So if the number is like 2.67, it won't round it up. We'll just display it as 2.67. So now we'll do transaction amount. We'll pass it in, and then now we are displaying the text and the amount. Let's just go check this out now, how it looks. So as you can see, it looks beautiful. So it's red because this is minus and this is positive, so it's showing green. This is the class that we done over here inside the list item. So it's based on the transaction amount.